Welcome, everyone, to episode number 76 of the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Tempty. Today, we've got Kimo Kippen joining us as the first guest in our mini-series on the importance of building the skill of decision-making in individuals and in teams. Kimo is the founder of Aloha Learning Advisors and a council director at the Conference Board. He's also the former chief learning officer at Hilton. Thank you for sharing your talents and insights with us today, Kimo. Kimo, aloha to you.
Aloha, and my pleasure to join you here today, Andy. Good to see you.
Yes, good to see you. As a disclaimer for our audience, Kimo and I worked together a bit at the Conference Board, and I just really enjoyed our time together. Before we get started, we always do this. It would be great if you told our listeners your story.
Yeah. Very briefly, I would just say what I would like to share with you all. One, thank you, Andy, again for the opportunity. And just to say that I'm born and raised from Hawaii. I'm actually about 3/4 Hawaiian. My family's lived in Hawaii for about 8 generations. And I spent a great deal of my time in the hospitality space. Obviously, this being such a destination from a hospitality perspective, Hawaii. And I put myself through college and through university and through by working in restaurants. And so I started in this industry as a bus person and then moved up into other positions and then restaurant management, into leadership in restaurants, and then got a job working at the Maui Marriott. And then from the Maui Marriott moved to corporate headquarters in Bethesda, Maryland, in the learning function. And then from there moved to London to lead all efforts for learning globally outside of the U.S. for Marriott, and then left Marriott to join a private entrepreneur based out of Rome. So we moved to Rome, and then from Rome, he moved us to Monte Carlo, where I lived the next 9 years in Monaco, leading his efforts. He wanted to create and build a corporate university. He bought the exclusive rights to franchise a very large fast food restaurant chain in all of the former Soviet Union and Europe, and so I led that effort, and then after about 9 years, I decided to take an opportunity to move back to the States, and I actually went back to Marriott then to lead the learning function, and then served in other senior HR roles, leadership engagement, management engagement, all engagement for all employees, talent management or capability, more on the OD side. I then left Marriott to become the chief learning officer for Hilton as part of its IPO process, so part of the senior leadership there. And that was very, very exciting to lead that effort. And then at the end of 2018, I left my corporate role and set up my own shop. And if you will, as a personal and private consultant, I really just wanted to spend more quality time giving back. So now I spend my time more as a consultant and advisor, and I'm really focused. I would just say, if I were to share very quickly with you my mission, my vision, and my purpose. My purpose in life is to know significant and unconditional love, and which I have, I'm very happy to say.
Nice.
And I would say from an aspirational vision, I aspire to be a better citizen of the world. And then from a mission perspective, my whole focus is around how do we create greater greater access to learning and education, thereby changing the life of that one individual and then generations to come. And I just see that happening over and over again, where you can just hear stories, and those stories rolled up into, we know through great research that learning and education makes a huge difference to, again, the individual, but more to the community, and more important, to a nation. And so we know through research that it actually, those cultures, those communities, those countries that focus more on education have better health results, they have better longevity, and they also have higher GDPs.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of it raises all boats.
Yep.
You get to benefit from this. And so that's where I and by the way, that's sort of how I use, we're going to talk about decision making, but it's those three things, in addition to my own personal values, that I think about how, for example, now I make a decision on whether or not I want to do something or not. And I use everything, my values plus what I've just talked about, And then one additional sort of filter that I use is, do I like them? And if I like them, so for example, here I am today spending time with Andy. He and I have known each other for quite a few years. And, it was also because Andy asked, and I like you, I like him, and it makes a difference. I think he's doing really good work. And I think the work that, and he's proven that from a business perspective. And now with the launch of his own book and the work that he's doing from his own organization consulting practice, he continues to do that. He continues to model that behavior. So I want to support that. And I also like him. I also like you. So that helps me to make better decisions as to where I want to spend my time and my life.
That's cool. So, Kimo, in that story, what I'm struggling to connect the dots on is how you got from bus person into learning. What
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
did
great
what does that
question.
look like?
Yeah, I would say one was a pivotal point from me in my life when I got to Marriott. As part of Marriott International, they send you to what's called, management training. So I went to LA and I was sitting there, and they also send you to food school. So it's a very technical class on learning about food safety standards and food standards.
Yeah.
And so on the management training side, so I'm sitting in this class and I'm watching the facilitator and I'm like, that looks like a fun job, And so that led me to having conversations of me asking them, like, well, what does it take to be one of those? And tell me the career path and what shits do I need to get punched in order to do that? And that's exactly what I did. And they gave me a whole laundry list of what I needed to do that. Obviously, I was working, in a operations role, which I still continue to do. But if I really wanted to get into the learning space, what would I need to do? And so they asked me to, punch my ticket from an academic perspective. They wanted my ticket punched from a practical training perspective. So I spent a lot of time doing practical operations-based technical skills training, for example. And then they wanted me to teach at a academic level again. So I got a job at a community college teaching. All led to the opportunity for me to then, to be able to apply for a position within the group that leads leadership development and all of leadership and all training for all of Marriott. And I got to go interview. And of course, we had to do, if you will, we had to do a demo, and I got offered the job as a training manager, which was, and then that just led to just a great career from a corporate perspective, 21 years at Marriott in various senior leadership roles, in and out of the learning space, all within the context of human resources, and then allowed me to take that leap to go from a learning leader. They didn't have really a CLO, if you will, at Marriott per se, but it ran the learning function, and then to being the CLO, they had that designated role at Hilton.
Yeah.
But that was also part of the IPO. So being part of that entire transition, at that time, this company, Hilton, was purchased by Blackstone, one of the largest private equities in the world. And then they were going to take that. They purchased it for $26 billion. Mm-hmm. And they then led the largest IPO in hospitality history, raising about $2 billion in capital to do that. And they're, of course, still, and as a normal process from an IPO perspective, they continue to flourish and have done extremely well in that vertical as well.
That's awesome. If you have to look back at that arc that you just described for us in just a few sentences, was there a point in time that just or something that just put rocket boosters behind your career?
Well, one, having that experience to say that's something I really want to do. So that first initial was, and then asking for the guidance from a career perspective, like, what is it that I'm going to, if I really wanted to do that, what would it take to do it? And then just being extremely goal focused and to, hit that punch list to be able to do that. And then I would say the other significant part of all of this was doing work internationally. So, which was always my dream and goal, was to do work and to live internationally. So moving to London, with Marriott was a really big deal to be responsible for all of learning outside of the continental US. So I had no responsibility for learning in America, which is where most of the action was. But it was very new entrepreneurial opportunities outside the US, so with heavy emphasis in Europe and then Hong Kong. And so I was really focused just really on Europe, but, spending much of my time there, I would just say from a personal perspective, again, going back to my vision statement and being an aspirational, better citizen of the world, that really helped to better understand work. Because I think one of the key things that I would share in terms of decision making, going back to the theme here, is that context is everything. So everything is about the external context, the external influences, the competitive landscape, and then all the internal factors, environmental, socioeconomic, political, obviously within an organization, I think play a huge influence on the context, influencing your decision-making process.
Yeah. So let's dive into decision-making a little bit deeper. Can you help our listeners understand the process that you go through when you're faced with one of those big, multifaceted organizational decisions?
Sure. So I think, it really starts again from I'm going to take it from probably the most strategic, but, as I've kind of articulated to you in the beginning, what it is from a personal perspective, I kind of go back to what it is from an organizational perspective. So one of the things I would say that Hilton, for example, did very well is setting the framework for purpose as to why are we all here working at Hilton, and then how does my individual role contribute to that based on the values that Hilton has, based on then their vision, their mission in terms of what they're doing. So think of those as guide rails or guideposts in helping one, filters in helping one to make good and better decisions. And you got to keep this in context that Hilton, 118 countries, 20 something brands, 390,000 employees globally. How do we seek alignment from an organizational perspective to navigate that so that we all show up, singing the same song in the right way, knowing that we're going to do the right thing. And having that sense of alignment is really important. And that, of course, that alignment all goes back up to leadership. And again, thinking about values, purpose, mission, and vision. Having said all that then, when confronted with a business challenge in terms of making a decision, one of the things that we always start with is the customer, and really thinking about everything from a customer-centric, perspective, everything being focused on the customer and then the customer data. In the hospitality space, for example, we're extremely focused on loyalty and NPS scores and intent to return. So those are, and then in terms of the decision, I think being able to define the problem statement would be another one of the big things. Like, so what if we were to define the problem or the business challenge? What would that be? And then collecting that data, and then using, I call it a really, a divergent, or you would say a convergent process, and then a divergent process, where you'd be seeking to collect, again, all that data around context in an effort to make the right decision to particularly solve that problem from an internal perspective. And then from an external perspective, so first I was, inside in looking in, and then I'm inside in looking out. So that inside in looking out, I think, is very, very important, so that one is not making a decision in a vacuum, that you're really taking, again, a snapshot or a picture. And that, by the way, the snapshot's an important word, because our decisions are based on a moment in time, right? So, and then the thought has to be that, how is that decision going to have impact or consequences as a result of that decision that you make? And then I think we also have to ask the question around, what are the unintended consequences or impacts as a result of making that decision? And so and there's lots of tools or models that one can use to be able to do that. I would say that's great. Having a model or a framework to use, I think, is a very positive thing. My thought would be is also to kind of stick to it. Use that. Is there a model in the organization that is helping you to make better decisions in that sort of converging and diverging process to be able to do that? And I always go back again to the customer. So what is the voice of the customer saying? And in this case, when I say voice of the customer, I'm talking about the paying customer through the product and service that one might offer. And then as well, the internal customers that I'm having to, if this was internally focused, then what are the internal customers that I have? And then I would also seek to, for lack of better words, who's your kitchen cabinet? Who are the people that you would see within your immediate sphere? Influencers that would help. I like doing a influence chart, like a bullseye, at the center,
Yep.
And then kind of expanding out. Some people like to use a RACI model,
Yep.
Who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulting, and who's going to be informed. I like that. And I would probably say, as we look to then make that decision, again, depending on what scale we're doing, if we're doing this from a project perspective, because that could be a big project, then I would look to, executive sponsorship. And having an executive sponsor in the context of a project, very important. And then in the context of self and individual, having in this case, I would say a coach or someone that, would serve as your mentor, depending on the decision that you're making, be it, business-wise or professional. Wherever you seek that guidance, for you personally and organizationally, for you looking through an executive sponsor, that's what I would see would be extremely valuable in terms of your process to be able to do that. And then agility, right? So that you're making when you make a decision, it's about being agile. So the ability to switch and cut, to turn quickly and to change directions. That, of course, is all based on feedback. So
Yep.
What sort of gates are you setting up? And if you're doing a defined project, obviously there are milestone gates that are being set up. But if you're doing this on a more personal level, it's like, well, how do you know that that's really working? How do you know that you're having an impact? What data do you have in order to make that decision that I need to change, cut, switch, whatever that means? But I think what I am trying to emphasize here is around agility based on feedback, then to modify, the direction that you're taking.
Yeah, my mind is still kind of focused on your outside in and then inside out framework. I think that's going to be really helpful for our listeners to think about that bidirectionality of your decision-making process, because especially in large organizations, we get so focused on ourselves and the internal that, we forget about the customer and we forget about the world around us. It really causes big problems.
It really does. And I can tell you, I've worked for an organization that really didn't want you stepping out of your cube, literally. They really didn't want you looking up and looking out. Yep. They didn't want to see you terribly engaged, in those outside circles. And then I worked for another one that just thought, oh, please go do all of that. Yeah. Part of the reason why I am so involved, if you will, in so many other personally extracurricular things for the conference board, for example, is because it's really all about benchmarking. It's all about learning how other organizations are doing what they're doing, why they're doing what they're doing, what results are they, what are they learning, what results are they having. And that's all in service of, making better decisions and being more nimble, fast, agile, quick, flexible, and then being able to navigate this. And when you work for large organizations like we do, it's not always easy to turn that ship.
Right.
to be able to make those decisions quickly and then to see the impact of that change. So there is a level of what I would say entrepreneurialism that I would really want to see, further, develop that. And yet at the same time, we all have to line up. But when we think about the only reason why organizations at the end of the day are really in business is to grow, and if growth is not a key objective of one, I would say at a personal level or at an organizational level to grow, because if you're not growing, what are you doing?
Right.
You're dying.
You're standing still and you're atrophying. Yeah.
So you got to, move towards growth. And, in order to do that, are you taking those, outside in, inside out approaches to be able to listen to the ground and then, we've had some great examples of where that's worked really well, from all that we've gone through in the last couple of years with COVID, for example. And I would also the big thing that we haven't mentioned yet, but I think is such an influencer in the space as an enabler, not for for the purpose of it, but is around technology and how digitalization influences or enables, your ability to take things to scale, which is in support of growth, of it being repeatable and scalable.
Yeah. Well, Kimo, we're going to take a really short break for a commercial. And when we get back, I'm going to ask you about your mentors and former bosses that were really good at this. Thanks for listening to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andrew Temte. In my book, Balancing Act, Teach, Coach, Mentor, Inspire, I explore the characteristics required of leaders who must find balance between strength and vulnerability, confidence and selflessness, passion and measure, and leadership and followership. Balancing Act is available today at Amazon.com. And we're back with Kimo Kippen. We're talking about decision-making in the workplace. Kimo, is there a mentor or a former boss or colleague that just had outstanding decision-making skills? What set them apart?
I can think of one immediately that comes to mind, and to this day serves as a personal mentor and coach to me. And I would probably share with you that he was probably one of the toughest bosses that I ever had. And that's what I think I valued so much about him, because it was never about me personally, but it was always about the work. And then he would go through a whole sort of process. Even when he would just talk to me, he would say, and he would have a ton of questions that he would just ask as the leader, like, why are we doing this? And then what I just found so fascinating, and again, for him is, this all decision making is just such a strong attribute about what makes a great leader, so that when it came to being a great leader, everything really then focused back to purpose, to purpose, values, mission, and vision. And, you could just, and you could just see the way his questions went, that it just aligns so well with that. And of course, we're talking about making business decisions. But there's a quick story. I'll never forget the day he said to me, he goes, Kimo, I was the head of HR and for this brand, Renaissance Hotels. And he said, Kimo, he said, the function that you're responsible for has two words: human resources. And he says, and I just want to remind you that first word that makes the title up of human resources. And that's what I want to focus in on. So I want to make sure that we're making, and in my role, if you will, as the guardian of the human resources talent, I want you to have a perspective or an opinion about this. And his one thing he said to me all the time is, Kimo, if you don't have 8 zillion questions as the leader to ask about something, then you're not providing a value. You should be asking tons of questions, and you should be prepared to be able to answer those questions to the best of your ability, which means do your homework. And I, read a lot too on this topic of what defines success. And what truly defines the success is doing the work. Then it's also doing the right work.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a great mentor. Now let's turn the tables a little bit here and have you be the mentor for somebody else. So let's run a quick thought experiment. Suppose you have an early career manager sitting right in front of you right now who struggles to be decisive and isn't confident in their decision making. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I think I love a coaching model. So I would strongly suggest, it's that notion of also, soaring with soaring with the eagles versus flying with the turkeys. So I would encourage you to then think about, well, if you were to aspire to your next role or to a future role, would you consider to be best in class? And then I would gobble up all that has to do with either that person and or their approach. I would then look to do some benchmarking, and then I would really seriously think about having a coach / mentor. And then I would want to encourage you to have a plan, focus on that plan. Then what's the roadmap? What are the action steps? What's your career plan to be able to do that? And then I would, again, have that coach get the feedback, but I would want to encourage you to take risks and calculated risks. One of the things that I would just do from a talent management and talent perspective, as we're doing human capital reviews, for example, I'm always really trying to encourage how do we help organizations, move forward on talent, to take greater risks with talent. And of course, I'm really focusing on how we're going to create a better playing field from an inclusion and belonging perspective, that we are taking greater risks in this case and providing greater support to women and minorities in organizations to help them advance. And so I really want to encourage that behavior. And I want to encourage, this whole notion, Amy Edmondson's work around, for example, psychological safety. I'm a real strong believer in that, but that's in the culture of the organization. But where do you find safety and security within yourself and or your immediate network, so that you can take those, again, calculated risks to make those decisions, to be able to make better decisions, again, to advance your career. And what I'm also, from a career perspective, up's not the only way. There's many steps that one can take: sideways, upside, downside. I mean, moving back one step to move forward 2 steps, moving from a small organization, it's the interest. And when I've coached people, it's like, are they a big fish in a small pond? And what would that mean if they wanted to become a small fish in a big pond? Right. What would that transition look like? What would be the steps that one would take to be able to do that?
Yeah. So I think this is a great segue into my next question. You and I talk about skills all the time, and what I heard, I heard psychological safety in that last answer, but there was courage, the ability to screw up the courage to actually make a decision. What other skills do you recommend that people really foster to become better decision makers?
Thank you. Well, I think you hit on one that, again, let's just stay with the topic of courage. And along, I would say, with that goes grit.
Yep.
And again, what we know that drives to success is the ability to get the work done. So, execution is really important. Doing the work is really important. Having, again, a clear understanding, what I always kind of go back to is the customer is really important. Knowing the business is really important. McKinsey, you may have probably seen this, but from a skills perspective, outlined this in 4 major buckets, which they had it being cognitive, interpersonal, digital, and self-leadership. And where I always like to start is in the bucket of self-leadership, which I've hopefully tried to demonstrate from the beginning of this conversation, which is in terms of my self-management, my self-leadership, do I truly have, and this is, by the way, a lifelong pursuit as being a lifelong learner, but my level of self-awareness, am I aware of the impact that I'm having on others in an organization and or people? And then, leading to those, from that self-leadership, then leading to these interpersonal skills, and that the ability, of course, because many of us work in organizations, is the ability to get things done through others and in a collaborative way. So that word around collaboration / teamwork makes a huge influencer on your ability to then get work done. And then when you think about this at an enabling way, you think about the digital, skills and knowledge that one has, or you think about the cognitive side of things, that you have the smarts, if you will, to do that, of knowing your content area or being a great subject matter expertise and having the skills, the functional knowledge, the functional skills to be able to do that.
Right.
That to me speaks in the literal thing of having the knowledge of the business, really. So the clear question I always ask is, do you have a clear understanding as to how your organization measures its success? And I notice I didn't say money. I said measures its success. Do you have a clear understanding around how that is known? And can you speak to it? Can you know it? Can you then describe how your solution is solving a business challenge that then you can speak to, that how you can articulate the impact that made in terms of, and from a PM perspective, you would say the benefits realized, did it really say, when you put that business case together and you talked about the ROI, but taking it one step forward, did you actually then can you articulate the benefits realized? Most organizations don't look back to say, can we really attest to the benefits realized, in terms of, did it achieve what it said that it was going to do?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for supporting our previous mini series on business acumen and the importance of business acumen. There's a method to the madness here of why decision making came after business acumen as a setup. So I fully agree that that's a key skill. Kimo, we got to close the show out, but I got one more question for you.
Okay.
Can you tell us about what's going on at the conference board, number one, and number two, what are you most excited about for the future of learning and development?
Yeah, I would say really kind of what's going on in the broadest perspective, is if you look at the socioeconomic landscape, obviously the concerns around the economy, inflation, where that's all going. Obviously, 2023 looks like it's going to be a rather soft year. And of course, we're concerned around GDP. We're concerned around global GDP. Obviously, we're concerned about the socio-political, economic, what's going on in Ukraine right now, what goes on from a sustainability ESG perspective, and or from a sustainability / climate perspective, where the impact that's having. So all this from there's a lot to be concerned about. The World Economic Forum is taking place as we speak today in Davos. And the key thing that they were wanting to talk about there is what's going on in Ukraine, and the influence and how we kind of need to come together as a world to be able to help figure this out. And so this is kind of big, hairy challenges that the world is facing. Then kind of dropping this down to what I get really excited about from a learning and development perspective, or from a human capital perspective. I would in my mind, there is no greater time to be in our space /HR development, human development, just because of everything that's is going on. And two, everything that we took for granted was challenged or questioned, and that was a result of the pandemic. And so as a result of it, the landscape, the context is so significantly changed that everything that we thought before could have been a challenge, it's different. whether better or worse, it is now different.
Right.
And then, our ability to stay agile, stay nimble, be flexible, I don't never think of it as the new normal. It's sort of the next normal.
Yeah.
But what I would hope is that as a result of all this change that we've all become better change agents. And again, this starts with personal resiliency, then to organizational. And, so we're spending a lot of time talking about mental health. We're spending a lot of time talking about then organizational health as it pertains to mental health, right? And there's lots of ways that we can go out and measure that. But I'm terribly excited about the opportunities, given all the enablers, and most importantly, from a mindset perspective, from very low unemployment rates to very, to the great resignation, all the things that we've been hearing about in the news. But I'm very excited about how human development around the human being is, I think there's this tremendous sort of renaissance that's taking place, and people kind of asking the big question, why am I doing what I'm doing? And again, the thing I just always think about is like, every day I vote with my feet, and so the question that comes from me, a very personal one, is like, am I moving towards joy? Am I literally moving towards my purpose, to no significant unconditional love? But that means, am I moving towards joy? And, on most parts, I can answer that question wholeheartedly, 110% yes, that I am moving in a direction towards joy.
Yeah.
And that leads to making better decisions because your person is in alignment. That self-management we talked about is in alignment.
Yeah. Well, and I'm telling the audience that Kimo and I did not have a conversation about this beforehand, but Kimo, we've launched, by the time this podcast comes out, we will have launched the Personal Purpose Guidebook as a free resource on andrewtemte.com. And so download your copy today so that you can get after your personal purpose, your personal vision, and so that you can make better decisions. So, Kimo, thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It was just an absolute pleasure. I'm sure our listeners got tremendous value from the conversation. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, Andy. Anytime.
Yeah.
All the best. Aloha.
Yeah, so my name is Andrew Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all of the major podcast services and out on YouTube now. Please like, subscribe, rate, share, all that fun stuff, and we'll see you next time.